Picture this scenario. You're 22 years old, fresh out of college in your home country. Your father just sold 2 acres of ancestral farmland to pay a consultancy firm located in a strip mall 3 towns over. They promised you what seemed like the golden ticket, a student visa to Canada, maybe Australia, or perhaps the United Kingdom. They showed you glossy brochures featuring university campuses that looked exactly like Hogwarts from the movies. They told you that if you just studied business management for 2 years, you'd automatically get a work permit, then permanent residency, and finally, you'd be able to bring your entire family over to what they described as paradise. So, you carefully pack your entire life into 2 worn suitcases. You land at Toronto's Pearson Airport or London's Heathrow, heart pounding with excitement and dreams. But when you finally get to your college, it's definitely not Hogwarts. Instead, it's a single cramped room located above a Domino's pizza shop in a suburban industrial park. And your student housing? Well, it's a thin mattress thrown on the floor of a damp basement shared with 6 other guys from different countries, costing you $800 a month in cash. For the last decade, this harsh reality was the experience for millions of international students worldwide. It was what experts called the international student boom, essentially a modern gold rush. Governments desperately wanted the GDP bump that came with student spending. Universities wanted those hefty tuition fees, which were often 3 to 4 times what local students paid. And landlords? They wanted that guaranteed rent money flowing in monthly. Everyone was getting rich and building wealth, except the actual students themselves. But suddenly, the music stopped playing. In 2024 and 2025, the Western world woke up with a massive economic hangover. Borders are tightening faster than ever before. Enrollment caps are slamming down hard. The golden ticket that was promised is being systematically revoked across multiple countries. Welcome to the end of an era that changed global education forever. Today we're breaking down the new immigration rules, the geopolitical backlash that's spreading, and the economic catastrophe that's about to unfold across multiple continents. Let's dive deep into each major destination. Let's start with perhaps the worst offender in this global game of musical chairs, Canada. For years, Canada was described by immigration experts and consultants as the Wild West of international education. If you could fog a mirror and pay the required fees, you were basically guaranteed admission. Between 2013 and 2023, the number of international students in Canada didn't just grow steadily, it absolutely exploded, nearly tripling to over 1 million permit holders. That's more people than the entire population of San Francisco suddenly dropped into a country with a housing supply that hasn't changed significantly since the 1990s. But the real story isn't about prestigious universities like the University of Toronto or McGill University. No, the real story that nobody talks about is the strip mall colleges scattered across the country. Here's exactly how this elaborate scam worked, and I use that word very carefully and deliberately. Public colleges in Ontario, desperate for cash because the provincial government froze domestic tuition rates for years, realized they had discovered a massive loophole. They started forming what they called public-private partnerships with sketchy operators. Essentially, a reputable public college located hours away from any major city would license its curriculum and good name to a private career college operating out of a strip mall in the Greater Toronto area. These private colleges were pumping out diplomas in vague subjects like general arts and science or hospitality management to tens of thousands of students who never stepped foot on the actual main campus. Many didn't even know where the main campus was located. Why did the students eagerly sign up for these questionable programs? Not for the education quality, that's for sure. They signed up because these diplomas came with what immigration consultants called the Holy Grail, the Post-Graduation Work Permit, or PGWP. It was essentially a backdoor immigration scheme, cleverly masquerading as higher education. Students knew it, colleges knew it, and the government definitely knew it, but chose to look the other way because of the economic benefits. And then the housing market completely broke. Rent prices in cities like Brampton and Surrey skyrocketed beyond belief. We started seeing disturbing reports of something called hotbedding, where desperate students would rent a bed in 8-hour shifts. You'd sleep for 8 hours, then wake up and vacate your spot so someone else could sleep in your bed. Food banks designed for low-income families were being raided by international students who couldn't afford groceries. The social contract that held Canadian society together was rapidly fraying at the edges. So, in 2024, the Canadian government finally panicked and took action. Immigration Minister Mark Miller, who has essentially become the grim reaper of the international education sector, dropped the hammer with unprecedented force. First, they implemented a hard cap system. For 2024, they slashed new study permits by 35% across the board. But they didn't stop there with just one cut. In late 2024, they announced the 2025 cap would be cut by another 10%, bringing the target down to just 437,000 permits nationwide. But here's the detail that completely ruins the strip mall business model: the attestation letter requirement. Previously, you just applied directly to the federal government and waited. Now, every single province has a strict quota system. To apply for a student visa, you absolutely need a provincial attestation letter, called a PAL. It's basically a golden ticket that you need before you can get the actual golden ticket. And guess who isn't getting these precious letters? The private colleges and strip mall schools have been effectively zeroed out of the system. The result has been complete chaos across the sector. We're seeing major public colleges in Ontario projecting deficits of hundreds of millions of dollars for the first time in decades. Conestoga College, which was the poster child for this international student explosion, and at one point saw nearly 100% of their enrollment growth come from international students, is watching their entire empire crumble in real time. And there's an even darker side to these changes. The PGWP rules changed dramatically. If you graduate from one of those private partnership colleges now, you get no work permit whatsoever. If you're an undergraduate student and you want to bring your spouse to Canada, there's no open work permit available anymore. Canada has effectively put up a giant sign that says, "We're closed for business unless you're pursuing a master's degree or a PhD from a recognized institution." The era of the diploma mill to permanent residency pipeline in Canada is completely dead, buried, and gone forever. The economic fallout we're about to see in strip malls across the Greater Toronto Area is going to be an absolute bloodbath for investors and operators. If Canada was the Wild West of international education, Australia was definitely the gold rush capital of the world. But down under, they developed a unique and particularly troubling problem: ghost colleges. You're probably wondering, what exactly is a ghost college? It sounds like the premise for a bad horror movie, but it's actually a brilliant and completely illicit economic engine that operated for years. Here's exactly how the setup worked in practice. You'd arrive in Australia on a legitimate student visa attached to a well-known, expensive university like the University of Sydney. You'd pay the first semester's hefty fees to get your foot in the door and establish your legal status. But just 3 weeks after you arrived in the country, you'd strategically drop out of the expensive program. You'd then transfer to what's called a vocational education and training provider, or VET provider, essentially a cheap private college that operates out of a nondescript office building in an industrial area. These colleges earned the nickname ghosts because often absolutely nobody went to actual classes or learned anything meaningful. The students were there for one reason only: to work illegally and earn money. They'd drive Uber cars for 12 hours a day, they'd work in restaurant kitchens for cash under the table, they'd work construction jobs on weekends. The college would just mark them as present and attending classes for a monthly fee, keeping their student visa status technically valid while they worked full-time. It was essentially a pay-to-play visa scheme that everyone involved understood, but nobody officially acknowledged. The Australian government, looking at their migration numbers hitting record highs with over 500,000 net migration in a single year, finally decided to burn these ghost colleges to the ground. Enter what they called the Genuine Student, or GS test, implemented in March 2024. Australia scrapped their old Genuine Temporary Entrant rule and replaced it with this much stricter GS test. It sounds like just a semantic change in terminology, but the impact has been absolutely lethal for applicants. Immigration officers now have broad discretionary power to ask tough questions like, does this particular course actually make logical sense for your stated career goals? If you're a 30-year-old engineer from Nepal applying for a Certificate 3 in commercial cookery, the answer is now automatically no. Rejected. If you have any unexplained gap in your study history, you're rejected. If the course you're applying for is significantly cheaper than comparable programs in the same sector, you're rejected immediately. Student visa refusal rates from key source markets like India, Nepal, and Pakistan have hit record highs that nobody saw coming. We're talking about rejection rates climbing over 20 to 30% in some sectors, literally overnight. But the Australian government didn't stop at implementing just the new test. They went directly for applicants' wallets with punishing fee increases. In mid-2024, they more than doubled the student visa application fee, hiking it from $710 to a staggering 1,600 Australian dollars. And it continues climbing each quarter. That fee is completely non-refundable, which means if you get rejected after the new screening process, the government keeps your $1,600 without any recourse. It's literally a tax on hope and desperation. Just like Canada's approach, Australia introduced what they call a National Planning Level, or NPL, for 2025, essentially a hard cap of 270,000 new international student commencements per year. This cap is split between traditional universities and vocational training providers, creating intense competition for limited spots. The universities are absolutely screaming about the financial implications. Prestigious institutions like the University of Sydney and the University of Melbourne are warning that research funding, which has been heavily cross-subsidized by profitable international student fees for decades, is going to completely evaporate without that revenue stream. The message from Canberra is crystal clear to anyone paying attention. They want high-value students exclusively, the wealthy kids who will attend the prestigious Group of 8 universities, pay $50,000 a year in tuition without financial stress, and leave the country immediately when they're done with their degrees. They absolutely do not want gig economy workers who are disguised as students and plan to stay permanently. For the ambitious students sitting in Mumbai or Manila right now, the Australian dream just got twice as expensive and 10 times harder to achieve realistically. If Australia is systematically burning the ghost colleges, the United Kingdom is effectively burning all the lifeboats that students and families have relied on. For years, the UK had a secret weapon in the competitive international student market: dependent visas that actually worked. Unlike the United States or Canada, where bringing your spouse and children was a logistical nightmare involving separate applications and extensive documentation, the UK was relatively open and straightforward. If you came to study for a one-year master's degree program, you could bring your entire family without excessive bureaucracy. This policy was a crucial lifeline for mature students from Nigeria, India, and Ghana who had families to support. The arrangement was simple and effective. One partner would study and work toward a degree, while the other partner would work legally to support the family financially during the study period. It wasn't just about getting an education. It was a comprehensive family investment strategy that made financial sense for middle-class families in developing countries. But in January 2024, that door slammed shut with devastating force. The Conservative government, in its dying days before losing power, banned international students, except those enrolled in research-based postgraduate courses, from bringing any dependents whatsoever. The impact was immediate, widespread, and absolutely catastrophic for affected families. In 2024 alone, the number of visas issued to dependents fell by a staggering 85% compared to previous years. Families were torn apart, and many students had to make impossible choices between education and family unity. Then the new Labour government came into power in 2025. Many international students and education advocates hoped for a policy reprieve and return to more reasonable regulations. Instead, the new government doubled down on the restrictive approach with even harsher measures. In May 2025, the Immigration White Paper dropped two policy bombshells that are currently wrecking the entire higher education sector across the UK. First, they announced the graduate route cut. The famous post-study work visa, which had been a major selling point for UK education, was slashed from 24 months down to just 18 months. That 6-month reduction might not sound significant to outsiders, but it represents the crucial difference between finding a solid career track job with proper sponsorship and having to pack your bags and leave the country the moment your lease ends. It's the difference between success and failure for most graduates. Second, they proposed something called the International Levy, a policy that has vice-chancellors across the country sweating nervously in their tweed jackets. the government proposed implementing a direct tax on the tuition fees that universities collect from international students. Just imagine the implications of that policy. Universities are already using profitable international student fees to subsidize domestic students, who actually lose money on every seat due to government funding cuts over the past decade. And now the government wants to tax the very profit margin that keeps the institutional lights on and pays staff salaries. The result of these combined policy changes is that we're looking at a financial death spiral for UK higher education. According to the Office for Students, or OFS, by the end of the 2025 to 2026 academic year, 75% of UK higher education institutions could be operating in deficit for the first time in modern history. We're not talking about Oxford University or Cambridge University here. Those institutions have endowments bigger than the GDP of some small countries and will weather any storm. We're talking about the middle class of universities, places like Coventry University, Sheffield Hallam University, or the University of South Wales that rely heavily on international student revenue. There are currently 24 education providers officially flagged by regulators as being at serious risk of insolvency within the next 2 years. Just imagine this nightmare scenario. You enroll in a university, pay £18,000 in tuition up front, and midway through your second semester, the university declares bankruptcy and closes its doors permanently. That's no longer dystopian fiction or an abstract worry. In 2025 Britain, it's a genuine and growing risk that students and families must seriously consider when making education investments. And now we arrive at what many consider the final boss of the international education system, the United States of America. For a brief period, the US was actually the beneficiary of Canada and the UK systematically dropping the ball with their restrictive policies. When Canada closed its doors to students, many looked south toward American universities as a backup plan. But in 2025, with the inauguration of the Trump 2.0 administration, the welcome mat was completely pulled out from under international students and replaced with what can only be described as a tripwire designed to catch and reject applicants. Let's examine the numbers that tell the real story. In the 2023 to 2024 application cycle, the rejection rate for F1 student visas hit 41% nationwide. That represents the highest denial rate in over a decade and shows a clear trend toward restriction. If you're applying from anywhere in Africa, the numbers become even more grimmer and discouraging. Rejection rates for students from West African countries have consistently hovered near 50 to 60%, making it nearly impossible for qualified students from those regions to access American higher education. The bias in the system is clear and measurable, but the real shock to the international education community came just days ago in December 2025. The White House announced a dramatic expansion of travel restrictions, which education experts are already calling Travel Ban 2.0, due to its similarity to previous controversial policies. Starting January 1, 2026, nationals from nearly 40 countries will face either partial or complete visa suspensions that will affect their ability to study in America. This list isn't limited to traditionally hostile nations or countries with poor diplomatic relations. It includes major student source countries like Nigeria, Ghana, and Malawi, nations that have sent thousands of students to American universities for decades. The administration's official justification centers on what they term security vetting deficiencies in these countries' background check systems. The reality, according to policy experts, is that it represents an America First firewall designed to dramatically reduce immigration from developing countries, regardless of the applicant's qualifications or intentions. And the situation gets significantly worse for international students who are already inside the United States and studying. In August 2025, the Department of Homeland Security proposed a rule change to end what's called duration of status for student visas. Here's what that technical term means in practical terms. Previously, if you were on a student visa, you could legally stay in the country as long as you were actively studying and maintaining your student status. Now, the new proposed rules would cap all student visas at fixed 4-year terms, regardless of your program length. Need 5 years to complete a PhD program? Too bad. You'll have to reapply, pay new application fees, and risk rejection all over again just to finish your degree. The message from Washington, D.C. is loud, clear, and unmistakable. We don't want you to stay in America long term. The H-1B visa program, which has traditionally been the main route for foreign workers to transition from student to employee status, is under extreme scrutiny and faces potential elimination. The OPT, or Optional Practical Training Program, which allows students to work for a limited time after graduation, is being systematically tightened with new restrictions added quarterly. The bridge from student status to worker status is being dismantled, plank by plank, making it nearly impossible to build a career in America as an international student. Quick pause here. I have to ask our viewers, are you personally feeling this squeeze right now? Maybe you're sitting in a visa application queue at this very moment, or you've had a rejection letter land in your inbox recently. If you have a personal story about this new iron curtain that's falling across international education, please drop it in the comments section below. We're actively trying to track the real-time impact of these rapidly changing laws and policies, and your individual stories matter enormously in understanding the human cost. And hey, if you want to stay ahead of these major geopolitical shifts that are reshaping global education, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. We track where the money flows, and right now, that money is moving faster than ever before. So the governments across the Western world are giving each other high fives and celebrating their success in, quote, securing the borders and, quote, protecting domestic students. But here's the part they're conveniently not talking about in their press conferences and policy announcements: the massive economic hangover that's about to hit. For the last 10 years, international students weren't just students sitting in classrooms. They were essentially a walking, breathing economic stimulus package that pumped billions of dollars into local economies across multiple sectors. In Canada alone, international education contributed over $22 billion annually to the national GDP. That's more economic impact than auto parts manufacturing, lumber exports, or wheat production. Now, imagine pulling that massive amount of money out of the economy virtually overnight. What exactly happens when that financial foundation disappears? Let's break it down sector by sector. The real estate crash nobody's talking about. Let's talk about a very specific character, the Brampton landlord. You know exactly the type I'm referring to. He's the guy who bought a modest 3-bedroom semi-detached house 5 years ago, renovated the basement into what's technically an illegal apartment, and stuffed 6 international students in there at $500 each per month. He was cash flow positive every month, driving around in a G-Wagon SUV, living what he thought was the Canadian dream built on steady rental income. With these new enrollment caps eliminating his tenant base, that guaranteed demand completely evaporates overnight. In cities like Brampton, Canada, or the outer suburbs of Melbourne, Australia, rental vacancy rates are already creeping upward for the first time in years. We're already seeing panic selling from small-time real estate investors who built their portfolios entirely around student housing demand. The slumlord millionaire business model that sustained thousands of property investors is completely dead and buried. And when those investors rush for the exit doors simultaneously, they're going to drag the entire local housing market down with them, affecting even non-investor homeowners. The strip mall apocalypse. But the economic damage extends far beyond just housing markets. Who exactly was keeping all those strip malls financially alive and profitable? Who was buying the $10 phone plans, the fast food meals, and the used Honda Civics that sustained these businesses? International students represented a captive consumer base with predictable spending patterns and limited mobility. Without that customer base, thousands of small businesses in college towns across Canada, Australia, and the UK are looking at an immediate 30% revenue drop that will force many into bankruptcy. We're going to see for lease signs popping up in strip malls like mushrooms after a heavy rain. The economic ecosystem that developed around international students is about to collapse entirely. The tuition bomb that nobody sees coming. And here's the financial kicker for all the domestic citizens who are thinking, good riddance, send them home. Do you understand exactly why your domestic tuition fees were so artificially low for so many years? It's because international students were directly subsidizing your education costs. They were paying 3 to 4 times the standard tuition fees so that you could pay just 1 times the base rate. With that cross-subsidy revenue completely gone, universities have exactly 2 choices available to them. First option, cut academic programs entirely. Say goodbye to arts departments, humanities programs, and any major that doesn't generate immediate job placement statistics. Second option, raise tuition fees dramatically for domestic citizens to make up the lost revenue. Let me make a bold prediction that I'm confident about. By 2027, domestic tuition fees in Canada and the United Kingdom will rise by at least 25 to 30%. The international student boom represented a massive financial subsidy for Western education systems, and now the bill for that subsidy is coming due for domestic taxpayers and students. So if the doors to the Big Four destination countries, the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia are rapidly closing, do millions of ambitious students around the world just stop wanting quality higher education? Of course not. Water always finds a crack in any barrier. The massive demand for international education is simply moving to new destinations that are actively welcoming students. Welcome to the rise of alternative education destinations that are about to benefit enormously from Western short-sightedness. Germany's strategic opportunity. Germany is looking at the Anglosphere, committing what can only be described as economic suicide, and they're laughing all the way to the bank while building their competitive advantage. Their public universities are effectively tuition-free, even for international students, representing an incredible value proposition. They just released a comprehensive new strategy, specifically designed to attract Indian technical talent and other skilled workers. While Canada is literally kicking qualified people out of the country, Germany is handing out opportunity cards, called Chancenkarten, to skilled workers who want to build careers there. Germany needs approximately 400,000 new immigrants per year just to keep their economy afloat due to demographic changes, and they're not being shy or apologetic about actively recruiting international talent that other countries are rejecting. Japan and South Korea's demographic crisis. These East Asian countries are facing what economists call a demographic cliff. They're literally running out of young people to sustain their economies. Japan recently set an ambitious target of recruiting 400,000 international students by 2033, representing a massive increase from current levels. They're systematically simplifying visa processes, offering more courses taught in English, and actively begging graduates to stay and work permanently after completing their degrees. The cultural adjustment and language barrier are certainly real challenges, but if your choice is between living in Japan with a guaranteed job or facing deportation from Canada, the decision becomes pretty straightforward. Transnational education, TNE, the sleeper hit. This represents perhaps the most interesting development in the entire sector. Why would you move to London and pay $2,000 per month just for rent, when you can earn a University of London degree while living in Malaysia, Dubai, or Egypt? Western universities, absolutely terrified of losing their international revenue streams entirely, are rushing to open satellite campuses and partnership programs abroad. Students get exactly the same degree credential and educational quality, but the migration component doesn't happen at all. The West gets to keep the profitable tuition money flowing in, but they lose access to the young labor force that would have stayed and contributed to their economies. It's the ultimate have-your-cake-and-eat-it-too strategy from a university perspective, at least until the source countries realize they don't actually need the Western brand names anymore. While the Western world is busy building walls and barriers, Eastern countries are strategically building bridges and partnerships. For decades, the flow of academic talent and brain power was essentially one-directional, east to west, developing countries to developed countries. But the geopolitical winds have shifted dramatically, and we're witnessing what experts call the regionalization of global education. Countries are increasingly looking within their own regions for educational opportunities, rather than automatically assuming Western education is superior. China's long-game strategy. You might think of China primarily as a country that sends students abroad to study, but watch what they're doing very carefully. They're executing a strategic pivot that will reshape global education. Their Study in China initiative is specifically targeting what they call the Global South. Students from Pakistan, Thailand, and various African countries who can't afford the $50,000 annual costs for tuition and living expenses in Boston or Sydney are being offered full scholarships, English-taught medical degree programs, and a direct pipeline into China's massive Belt and Road infrastructure projects worldwide. This isn't just about education. It's about building long-term economic and diplomatic relationships with the next generation of global leaders from developing countries. The return of the Asian tigers. Look closely at Malaysia and Vietnam. They're positioning themselves as the primary education hubs for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN. Why would you go to Canada and risk potential deportation when you can study in Kuala Lumpur, pay just a fraction of the cost, earn a degree from a branch campus of a top UK university like Nottingham or Monash, and live in a rapidly growing economy with real job opportunities? The value proposition is becoming increasingly attractive, especially for students from neighboring countries who share cultural similarities and don't face the same integration challenges they would encounter in Western countries. India, the sleeping giant awakens. The Indian government has finally realized they're bleeding billions of dollars in foreign exchange reserves every year to pay for Western university tuition fees. Their new strategy focuses on what they call internationalization at home, bringing Western educational quality to Indian soil. They're actively inviting top foreign universities to establish full campuses directly in India with the same academic standards. Deakin University from Australia has already opened a comprehensive campus in Gift City, Gujarat, offering the same degrees and faculty quality as their Australian campus. The message being sent to the Indian middle class is changing rapidly. It used to be, go west to succeed in life. Now the message is becoming, bring the Western educational model here and keep the money within the family and national economy. If this trend continues and accelerates as expected, the international student boom didn't actually end. It just moved eastward faster than most Western policymakers anticipated. The West is about to lose its monopoly on global talent development, and once that educational dominance is gone, it's not coming back anytime soon. So where exactly does this massive shift leave you if you're a student planning your educational future right now? The fundamental playbook for international education has changed completely, and the era of what I call the blind bet, where you just bought a plane ticket and hoped for the best outcome, is completely over. The golden ticket that was promised by education consultants has now become more like a lottery ticket, and the odds of winning are getting worse with each passing month. Here's your reality check, broken down into actionable advice. Follow the policy, not the brochure. Don't waste time looking at university rankings or glossy marketing materials. Instead, look directly at the immigration minister's social media feeds and official policy announcements. These rules are changing on a weekly basis, and what was true last month might be completely obsolete today. Specialization equals safety. General degrees in business management or liberal arts are becoming increasingly risky investments. Trade skills, healthcare programs, and advanced STEM degrees are the only visa categories that are mostly recession-proof and continue to be welcomed by governments. Look for the back doors. Germany, Japan, New Zealand, and emerging educational hubs across Asia are absolutely desperate for international talent and are actively recruiting students that other countries are rejecting. The American dream might be on pause for now, but the global dream of quality education and career opportunities is still very much alive if you're willing to look at a different map. The international student boom of the 2010s was essentially a wild, unregulated gold rush that benefited some people enormously while exploiting others. We're now in what economists call the correction phase of this market cycle. It's painful, it's messy, and a lot of people are going to lose significant amounts of money. But for students who are smart, adaptable, and well-informed about changing policies, there's always a way through these challenges to achieve your educational and career goals. I really want to hear from you in the comments. Are you currently studying abroad and experiencing these policy changes firsthand? Are you a landlord in a college town watching your rental income disappear? Or are you completely rethinking your entire life plan because of information you learned in this video? Let me know your thoughts and experiences in the comments section. If you had to choose just one country to pursue your education in right now, completely ignoring the traditional Big Four of US, UK, Canada, and Australia, where would you go and why? I'll be personally replying to the most interesting and detailed answers within the first 24 hours after this video goes live. If you found this analysis useful and informative, absolutely destroy that like button so YouTube's algorithm knows this is an important topic worth discussing and sharing with more people. And if you want to understand the other side of this massive economic shift, specifically the housing market crash that's coming next, click the video that appears right here on your screen. Stay sharp, stay informed about these rapid changes, and I'll see you in the next video.